Paris, October the 14th, 2015, 12:47 in the afternoon. The Rue de Rivoli stretched in both directions under a sky the colour of old pewter, and the city was doing what it always did, moving. Tourists with rolling luggage, businessmen with phones pressed to their ears, couples walking too close together to let anyone pass. Nobody was slowing down. Nobody was looking at the man sitting against the iron lamppost with a cracked guitar across his lap and a wool cap pulled low over his eyes. He was part of the scenery, the way broken pavements and overflowing bins are part of the scenery, noticed by no one, seen by everyone, meaningful to nobody. He had been sitting in that same spot since 7 o'clock that morning. His guitar case lay open at his feet. Inside it, €1 coin, 2 50-cent pieces, and a photograph tucked into the lining that he never let anyone see. He began to play. Not busker music, not the cheerful, simplified melody designed to pull loose change from passing pockets. He played Blackbird. Every note landed exactly where it was supposed to land. The finger-picking moved with the unhurried precision of a man who had played the song 10,000 times and still found something new in it each time. His voice, rough and weathered in the way that cold streets and colder nights make a voice, carried the melody without effort. Eyes closed, head tilted slightly. The song moved through him the way water moves through something that has learned to stop resisting. The crowd did not stop. A woman with a stroller angled around him without a downward glance. A teenager dropped a coin without breaking stride. 2 men in suits walked past, talking loudly about something urgent and tomorrow and someone named Michelle. Nobody stopped. Nobody listened. The song rose into the grey Paris air and dissolved. For a moment, it seemed like the city would simply swallow the music whole, like it had swallowed everything else about this man. Then, at the edge of the pavement, a man in a navy blue blazer slowed his walk. He had been moving with the purposeful stride of someone with somewhere important to be, hands in pockets, 2 others keeping pace alongside him. But something reached him, some frequency in that cracked guitar, that rough voice, that particular song. He stopped, turned his head. His eyes found the man against the lamppost. He stood completely still for 4 full seconds while Paris moved around him like a river around a stone. Then he took 3 steps toward the music. One of his companions reached for his arm, the quiet, familiar gesture of someone whose job it is to manage access. The man in the blazer raised one hand, barely above his hip. Not now. He stood on the wet cobblestones and listened. Not one person in the passing crowd understood what they were witnessing. Not one person realized that the man standing still in the moving river of people was the man who had written every single note of what he was hearing. But that moment didn't start there. If you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever poured everything you had into something and watched the world walk straight past it, stay with this story. Because what happened next on that Paris street is something that will stay with you long after this video ends. Subscribe if you are new here, and do not go anywhere. Rewind. Not years, decades. Liverpool, 1979. A 17-year-old boy sits on the floor of a terraced house in Toxteth, knees pulled to his chest, next to his father's record player. The needle drops. Let It Be fills the small room. The boy does not move for the entire song. He barely breathes. When it ends, he reaches over and plays it again. And then again. His name is Thomas Byrne, and something has just shifted inside him that will never fully shift back. Thomas grows up in the kind of house where money is counted carefully and dreams are kept quiet. His father works the docks. His mother serves school dinners. 4 children share 2 bedrooms. There is nothing spare. Not space, not money, not time. But his uncle, a weekend guitarist who plays pub stages across Merseyside, hands Thomas a second-hand acoustic and teaches him the basic chords one rainy Saturday afternoon. Within 8 months, Thomas is playing Beatles songs, note for note. By 19, he is playing small venues. By 22, people stop their conversations when he walks onto a stage. He never makes the big stages. Life arrives first, the way it always does for men like Thomas. A marriage at 24. A daughter, Caitlin, born the following year. A job at a print shop to keep the bills paid. The guitar moves to the corner of the bedroom. He plays on weekends, then occasionally, then rarely. But he never sells it. The guitar had belonged to his uncle, who died in 2001. Selling it would mean the last thread connecting him to who he used to be was gone. He cannot do it. In 2009, his wife Claire is diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She fights for 14 months. On her last night, Thomas brings the guitar to the hospital and plays Blackbird softly in the corner of the room while she sleeps. She opens her eyes once. She smiles. 3 days later, she is gone, and Thomas Byrne begins losing everything else, slowly, then all at once. Paris in October is beautiful in the way that makes loneliness worse. The cafes glow warm and golden through their windows. Couples move arm in arm along the Seine. The city does not notice Thomas Byrne. By the time that Tuesday arrives, Thomas has been homeless for 19 months. He sleeps in a shelter near Gare du Nord when there is space, on a bench near the Tuileries when there is not. He has learned to move slowly, to take up as little space as possible, to avoid the eyes of shopkeepers and the patience of police. He has learned that invisibility is both a shield and a prison, that the same quality that keeps you safe also makes you disappear. After Claire died, the grief did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, over years, dismantling things quietly. The marriage ended inside Thomas long before it ended on paper. His daughter Caitlin tried to hold the family together for 2 years, then stopped trying when Thomas stopped meeting her halfway. A disagreement became a silence. The silence became a wall. By 2013, he is alone. By 2015, he is on the streets of Paris with a cracked guitar and a photograph in the lining of his case that he has not looked at in 6 weeks because looking at it makes the day impossible to finish. Every morning, Thomas wakes before dawn, finds somewhere to wash his face, and walks to his spot on the Rue de Rivoli. He plays for 3 hours, rests, plays again. The music is not primarily about the money in the case, though the money matters. When he plays, he is not a homeless man in a cracked jacket. He is the teenager on the floor next to the record player. He is the young father who made Claire smile. He is someone. The morning of October 14th, he arrives at 6:50, tunes the guitar carefully, the G-string always pulls sharp in cold weather, warms his hands on a paper cup of coffee, and then he begins to play Blackbird. Softly, almost to himself. If this story is already reaching something inside you, hit that like button right now and keep watching, because what happens next will stop you completely. Paul McCartney was not supposed to be on the Rue de Rivoli that afternoon. He was in Paris for a 2-day promotional appearance tied to a documentary project. His schedule was precise: a lunch meeting near the opera, then a car back to the venue for a sound check, 40 minutes between the two. His assistant had mapped the walking route. They were moving through it efficiently, the way men with full schedules move through everything. Paul had been thinking about John. October always brought John back. Not on a specific date. Grief does not wait for anniversaries. It arrives ahead of the calendar, indifferent to timing, showing up in the middle of ordinary afternoons without warning or permission. He and John had written together in a way that was almost impossible to explain to people who had not experienced it. Two minds that finished each other's sentences before the sentences started. Blackbird was Paul's alone in the technical sense. He had written it in 1968, sitting by himself in Scotland with an acoustic guitar, thinking about the civil rights movement, about people rising from circumstances that should have made rising impossible. But John had always been in the room somehow. John was always in the room. He was not expecting to hear the song on a Paris pavement. But there it was, rising through the traffic noise and the crowd movement and the ordinary grey sound of a Tuesday afternoon. The finger-picking was exact, not a tourist approximation, not a simplified cover, the real architecture of the song, played by someone who understood not just the notes, but the weight behind them. Paul stopped walking. His assistant said something. Paul raised one hand, barely, almost no movement at all, and the sentence stopped unfinished. He listened to the whole song without moving. When it ended, he walked toward the lamppost. The man sitting against it opened his eyes and looked up, and for one long, suspended second, neither of them spoke. Paul crouched down until they were level. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Where did you learn to play it like that?" Thomas opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Paul sat down on the edge of the curb. His assistant made a sound behind him, something between a word and a warning. Paul did not look back. He looked at Thomas. "Take your time," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Those 5 words did something to Thomas Byrne that 6 years of silence had made him forget was possible. Someone was waiting for him to speak. Someone wanted to hear what he had to say. He started talking the way a man starts talking when he has not truly spoken in years. Slowly at first, then faster, then with the particular rawness of someone who has stopped caring how it sounds, because the alternative is carrying it alone for another 6 years. He told Paul about Liverpool, about the floor next to his father's record player, about the first time Let It Be played and the room tilted slightly beneath him. Paul smiled at that, not a performed smile, not the polished expression of a man in a public moment, but something quieter and more private. The smile of someone hearing his own life reflected back from an unexpected angle. Thomas told him about Claire, about the guitar in the hospital room, about Blackbird on her last night. He did not dress it up. He said it plainly, the way you say the truest things, without decoration, without apology. Paul's expression did not change, but something moved behind his eyes. Something that recognized the specific shape of that particular loss. "I lost someone too," Paul said. Nothing more. No elaboration, no performance of grief. Just those 4 words, placed on the pavement between them like something solid, so Thomas would know he was not talking to a man who had never felt that weight. Then Paul asked to hold the guitar. Thomas handed it over without thinking. Paul turned it in his hands, examined the crack along the body, ran his thumb slowly across the strings. Then, without ceremony or announcement, he began to play. Just the opening bars of Blackbird, on Thomas's cracked, battered, irreplaceable guitar, on a Paris street, with pigeons moving at the edges and traffic noise rising and falling in the distance. People began to stop. Within 60 seconds, there were 20 people standing in a loose half-circle. Within 2 minutes, there were 60. Phones appeared. A word moved through the crowd in French, then in English, then in 3 other languages simultaneously. Thomas sat against the lamppost and watched Paul McCartney play his guitar on the street in front of him, and something that had been sealed shut inside his chest for 6 years cracked open without warning. He did not try to stop the tears. He had nothing left to stop them with. If this story is moving you the way it moved everyone who stood on that pavement, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. Section 6 is where everything changes permanently. Paul's assistant was already on the phone. The sound check would have to wait. Paul stayed for 47 minutes. He sent one of his team to a nearby cafe, and they came back with 2 coffees and something to eat, and Paul and Thomas sat on the curb together, while the crowd slowly dissolved back into the city, and the coins in the guitar case filled faster than Thomas had ever seen in 19 months on that street. Paul asked about Caitlin. Thomas went quiet in the particular way of a man approaching something he has rehearsed in his head many times, but never said aloud. He told the story haltingly, with long pauses, with the specific shame of a father who knows he failed without fully understanding how. Paul did not offer solutions. He did not offer reassurances. He listened until Thomas was completely finished. Then he took out his phone and asked for Caitlin's last known number. Thomas said he did not think she would answer. Paul said, "You might be surprised." He put the number away carefully. Then he pulled a card from his jacket pocket and wrote a name and number on the back in pen. A friend in Paris, someone who ran a music program for serious musicians. "I'll call him tonight," Paul said. "He'll be expecting to hear from you." He paused. "Will you call?" Thomas looked at the card for a long time. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked. Paul looked at him steadily. "Because the world forgot to listen today. I didn't." He shook Thomas's hand, held it one moment longer than a handshake requires. Then he walked away down the Rue de Rivoli, and Thomas sat alone with a business card in one hand and a cracked guitar in the other, and the case between his feet held 47 euros. 3 months later, Thomas Byrne walked through the door of a music program on the left bank of Paris. Paul's friend had called first, exactly as promised. The enrollment was covered. The only condition Paul had mentioned as he stood to leave was one Thomas had been avoiding for 2 years. Write to Caitlin. Not to fix everything, just to begin. He wrote the letter that same night, 3 pages. He did not send it for 2 weeks. Then one morning he did, and he walked away from the postbox feeling lighter than he had felt since Claire was alive. Caitlin called on a Wednesday in January. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. It was not a reconciliation. It was something smaller and more fragile than that. A single thread of connection stretched across 6 years of silence. But it held. By 2017, Thomas Byrne was teaching guitar at that same program on the left bank. Beginners mostly, people who would come to music late or return to it after long absences. He played Blackbird on the first day of every new session. He never explained why. In a 2018 interview, Paul McCartney was asked if he remembered a particular afternoon in Paris. He paused before answering. "I remember a man playing one of my songs better than most people who have covered it professionally," he said. "That is the best thing you can hope for from something you have made, that it goes somewhere you never expected and does something you never planned." Thomas heard about that interview from Caitlin, who had been quietly following the story since it surfaced online. He called her when he finished reading it. That conversation lasted 40 minutes. Sometimes some songs find the people who need them most, and sometimes, if the world is still enough, the man who wrote the song finds them too. If this story reminded you that being heard can change everything, share it with someone who needs that reminder today. Subscribe if you are not already here, and we will see you in the next one.